Seems fair to me.
Yes, he did.
You don't know what fair is. You can't make it look like That's right. Any
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Thank you for joining us for another Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Lots of topics and some new art on the set. We'll get into that. But first, let's meet the panelists, starting with Wendy Wiese from the Big 550 KTRS. Bill McClellan from STLtoday.com and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Ray Hartmann from Ray Hartmann's St. Louis Insider. You can find that on Substack. And Mr. Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American. And we'd like to thank local artist Missy Castro for lending us some of her beautiful artwork, which is now above the mantle here on our set at Donnybrook. So if you are a local artist and you'd like to share yours, please contact us here at 9PBS. Bill, if you have some art, send it our way.
Well, I'm going to pass on that.
But if you'd like to give the governor your resume because you'd like to be the next circuit attorney for the city of St. Louis, your deadline is noon on Monday. Governor Mike Parson is accepting applications for people who'd like to fill the role that's being vacated by Kim Gardner. She leaves June the 1st. We've talked about her quite a bit. What about the successor? Any ideas?
Well, out of the people who've applied, and some of them seem very well qualified, my favorite is Paula Bryant, because I knew Paula when she was a prosecutor years ago, and she was very good. And then she became a judge, and I thought she was a very good judge, and she'd be a very good circuit attorney. I mean, everybody knows people like that who are just competent, and that's Paula Bryant. And I think that the fact that she was, for a long time, an assistant circuit attorney, a prosecutor, is really important these days, because whoever takes over that office, there's going to be no time for a learning curve. The office is in a state of chaos. There's no older veterans around. And so I think that Paula Bryant sounds really good for the job.
I was just going to say, you know, all of our just infinite knowledge, and we were discussing about the situation where who would appoint and all that. I didn't know there was an application process. And I think that it wouldn't have changed how I felt about it if Kim Gardner had left office. But I do find it interesting that you do have to declare that you would actually like the job. That you will take it. That you would take the job. And I think that's a good thing, okay? And I'm not sure which direction that the governor is going in, but just from my conversations with the mayor, it does seem like there is some, you know, back and forth between the two, that they are collaborating as to what would be a good fit for the job. Now, you know, when Tim Lomar gets the job, then we'll have enough. But
I was really encouraged to hear the governor say, our great city of St. Louis. I mean, I just thought I just sort of appreciated the our. I kind of like the symmetry of Judge Michael Noble of the 22nd Circuit because of the rudderless ship of chaos, which has become sort of part of our local lexicon these days. And I think that kind of shifted things. It shifted something and made her departure, you know, actually happen. And I think that he could probably assemble a terrific team. I felt good about that potential.
Well, I've heard good things about Judge Noble, and I don't know him. But, you know, yeah, a West Point graduate, I mean, there's some leadership there. But again, as far as the experience goes, Judge Noble was never a prosecutor.
Exactly, and I will say this. Well, go ahead.
No, I mean, to sit on the bench is...
I think I don't want to endorse anybody because that'll sink it. But I would make a full founder's endorsement of Judge Paula
Bryant.
Paula Bryant.
Paula Bryant. I go by Judge. We're on the first Judge Paula.
Well, that's enthusiastic. You learned her name and endorsed her.
Judge Paula. No, McClellan makes a great point. I mean, first of all, normally, like in judicial appointments, the governor chooses from a panel of 3. In this case, Bill gave him a panel of 2 in his column a couple months ago, and Paul was one of them.
Paul and Henry
really,
Autry was the other, another former prosecutor.
And my point is, he really shouldn't look no further than Bill's
Right.
panel. But to me, that's the way it ought to go. But I mean, he knows everything about crime. And I will say that having somebody that's been in the fray of the controversy is the last thing we need. One of the interesting things about this that's left out is it's a political job ultimately. I mean, in a sense that this person's theoretically could stand for a real election.
And I don't think that's what I was going to say. This is not going to be a political job. This is going to be an 18-month job. And I don't think you necessarily have been a prosecutor. I think you need an administrator. And I think if there was somebody who wanted to step in that runs one of the major law firms here or in Kansas City or something, I could get with that because it needs to be run like a law office. And this person may not do a lot of courtroom work for whatever this major firm he works for or she works for, but they run the office, and somebody needs to just run the office.
I think that having been a prosecutor is nice to have. The interesting contrast is when the only other time I know of we had this was '92 when George Peach resigned over sex and also taking the money from the government. He resigned in disgrace, and on a personal basis. And John Ashcroft, who was the governor at the time, appointed Richard Swatek, who was the candidate who was going to challenge Peach that year, but it was only 4 months out from the election. And it really wasn't controversial that I remember at the time. We were on the air because, I mean, he just picked, it was easy. He picked a Republican candidate for circuit attorney who was apparently a good, fine guy. And he was the lame duck. And, of course, he got crushed by George Peach's top assistant, D. Joyce Hayes, who obviously this wasn't an issue about the office itself. And then she became prosecutor for, I guess, 8 years. But it's a very different scenario when you're talking 18 months.
You know why it's so different? Well, first of all, I think Judge Noble did a great job a couple weeks ago in court, and I hear good things about him, but I don't think it looks good if he led to her resignation and that he profits from her departure.
But I don't think that's necessarily profiting if you're taking on that task.
And that's the whole point. Apparently, the circuit attorney's office has not been entering data into what's called PBK. It's a Microsoft program where you put data in so you know the files. She didn't want the Attorney General to get them. So there are no files right now because the prosecutors have been instructed not to feed the computer. Then, because a lot of these cases have been languishing 3, 4, 5 years, you know, witnesses move, or they die, or they get incarcerated, or whatever. And a new guy's going to come in there, he's going to look at the old case that's 4 years old, and then his guys are going to have a heck of a time trying to put the case together.
Okay, but I mean,
whoever
everybody
gets this thing,
everybody
it's going to
knows
be a disaster.
No,
I don't think they do know all that. I don't think they thought about that.
Judge Paula Bryant, I go by Judge Paula, is a she, so just it's not a he necessarily.
I didn't say that. I didn't even mention Paula Bryant.
No, you said a he, the new person.
Oh, okay, I see.
Oh,
Quite
she's a she.
Very well. I could have said she or he. Right. Well point. Well, okay, let's move on to Wendy. The circuit attorney's office, for some reason, refused charges of a Cinco de Mayo shooter, which was captured quite clearly in a photograph last weekend. On Saturday, 2 St. Louisans, a man and a woman, went out of a storefront, guns a-blazing, and fired into the crowd. The police took the photo. The woman was identified. They sent the charges up to the circuit attorney, and she refused the charges. What is going on? Is she purposely trying just to allow law or disorder to take over?
I don't know. We'd have to ask her. I have no idea. I've given up trying to figure that out. 33-year-old Darian Benton, the man in the photograph, he is behind bars. He is being held. The woman in the photograph is free. She was the one that apparently the witnesses who were all over television news saying that they were so disheartened, they were so discouraged, they were so sad about what's happening that many of the business owners are ready to pull up stakes and leave. So I don't sense any hesitation on the part of the people who were there. The photograph, you can see every detail of the woman's face. So how can you say there's not enough evidence? And Millhaven made the point this morning that there was absolutely no hesitation when it came to the McCloskeys, who were in the Central West End brandishing firearms on their lawn when they saw a crowd gathered in front of their home. She went right after them. So I guess we have to ask Kim Gardner what the reasoning is, because that is nonsensical.
Well, I was going to say there really is no explanation. And in these times where people are having a tough time coming up with bail or not getting bail, I mean, even if you couldn't charge this woman with attempted murder or whatever, I'm sure you could throw together 4 or 5 charges and just get her down there, and then she couldn't make bail and she'd be off the street. I mean, that's, if I could come up with that, then something really is wrong.
Well, things are wrong. I mean, we had 2 shootings 2 days in a row at the Cinco de Mayo festival. There were shootings in the Marriott garage 2 days in a row. And over the weekend, 6 people were killed, 15 others shot in St. Louis. In fact, Andy Banker reported that Bedlam in downtown St. Louis was so crazy with reckless driving and people driving excessive speeds and the donuts and the gunfire that the passengers on the Becky Thatcher riverboat refused to get off. Major Ryan Cousins did, Ray, admit this. He said there weren't enough police officers in downtown over the weekend. But at that press conference, kind of taking a look at all that was going on, the mayor was not there, no public safety director, no police chief. Shouldn't they have been there?
I don't think there's any, you can't assume that the mayor's going to go to every police press conference. I know it was a rough weekend. You know, we were just talking last week, the week before, about how the murder rate was down. You know, things, that's why I've cautioned people not to get too hung up on the statistics. I think the most interesting dynamic is the fact that we've got downtown Les Sturman, a friend and somebody who's had a great career at East West Gateway, been a guest up on Next Up. He's one of the people speaking out loudly on behalf of his fellow condo owners downtown. All the downtowns across the country that have been basically preached the importance of building around residents. And I happen to agree with not necessarily every detail of everything they say, but the people, I think the condo owners are not getting, the property owners are not getting listened to enough in general downtown. You can't on one hand say we need them to build around, but on the other hand, there's tensions between them and some of the bigger players downtown. There's tensions with the city. And I think it's going to be interesting to see this kind of tripartite
but you know what?
Even the businesses, though, talk about how things are out of control downtown and people don't want to work. And, you know, Sandburg, Phoenix moving from Washington Avenue because they think that's no longer safe. And they're moving about, 3 or 4 blocks south. I mean, it's just, it isn't just the condo owners who are saying, this is crazy.
Right. It's not that, you know, it's the condo owners is one thing. But we lost 2 18-year-old girls over the weekend.
Yep.
I mean, it was page 2 on the Monday Post-Dispatch, right? I mean, it should be page 1. I think the mayor should be at a press conference like that. I ran into a guy, had lunch with him on Wednesday. His daughter just got married 2 weekends ago in downtown St. Louis. He had to hire 2 off-duty police officers to walk the wedding guests from the ballroom to the parking garage and back and forth. I mean,
well, no, wait a minute. I'm not saying that this is not a problem. He didn't have to do that.
You know, he did.
He did
because the father of the groom witnessed the murder at 7th and Market. He was visibly shaken. He was a guy from
Okay, all right. I didn't know that. All right, I'm just saying.
And
I'm
the
not,
whole wedding was like freaking out in downtown St. Louis.
All right.
Just like the Becky Thatcher passengers. What kind of story is he going back to Dallas with?
No,
I mean, he could take 1,000 stories from the north side where we're shooting each other every other night, but we ain't gonna do nothing until, you know.
Well, point well taken, but those girls who died were in Hyde Park, and we're about 200 officers short right now. And, you know, one thing we want to hear is we're hiring more officers.
Well, okay, and if we hired 1,000 more officers, that would be great. I grow weary of, it's crazy, we got to do something. Well, could somebody please say exactly what it is that needs to be done?
Well, on the
And
17th, there's going to be a crime summit.
Right.
And they're bringing Thomas Abt, ABT, back. We had him in a crime summit 3 years ago in the offices of KMOX, and Reid was there, and the chief of police was there, and
And he did so well. Let's bring him back again.
no, they never hired him. They listened to him and did nothing.
All right. Different administration, so maybe this will be
Well,
different.
where has he worked that he's turned things around, Charlie?
Well, principally Oakland, Boston, and some other cities I can't remember. It's called Focused Deterrence. That's the name of his program. We went with Cure Violence instead. And as Ray said, homicides are down this year. Knock on wood, they'll continue.
Well, the other thing is, Alvin makes a great point here, and that is, we tend to, media, whatever it is you want to call it, tend to have press conferences and get worked up when it's something that happens in the central business district or,
Near the stadium.
Exactly.
No,
and
this was Cherokee and Hyde Park.
Okay,
No,
well,
I'm just-
whatever. But the point being, in terms of the, they could easily have a press conference pretty much every day
Every
to talk
hour.
about North St. Louis, and is the mayor.
They
Those
should.
lives are just we lost two
They should.
18-year-olds, but
They
they're
should.
just as, and it's a horrible tragedy to lose anybody, but we're losing a lot of people that don't get that attention.
I don't think those two 18-year-old girls got enough attention.
No, I'm sure they did.
really did.
I'm
All right,
not
and
saying they
I
did.
would agree with that.
I
I would-
agree.
I agree
I'm
with
not arguing. I'm not desensitized to it. I'm
Alvin,
just saying
yeah.
there's a lot of, we seem to be desensitized to the 18-year-old girls in North St. Louis that are dying, or the kids that are getting hit by.
But it's a lot of finger pointing, and you don't see don't see anybody out front. And I think that is why the perception has it's reality now.
Okay, I agree.
Alvin, speaking of
Crimes
the
are.
media.
Bill, crimes are. You've said we need a crime czar.
So
Oh,
are you
I've said
nominating
that. I've
him
said that
officially
long ago.
right now?
I mean, I think the crime everywhere in the city.
Yeah.
We had one, and it was Morris Schenker, who was the attorney for the mob in the early 1970s.
Hey, I remember writing in 2000 that Morris Schenker was the man of the millennial, as far as
Definitely.
certainly the man of the century.
Certainly lawyer for the mob.
But I am
Make it happen.
I am a believer that when organized crime got disorganized, it led to all this. I do believe that.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, what do you believe about Todd Roberson, the editorial page editor of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Alvin, who announced his retirement this week? It was a little bit controversial when he announced that he was working half-time in Connecticut and half-time in St. Louis, which is a little bit odd for our local editor. But definitely the editorials were a little more conservative recently compared to 10 years ago, for example. Overall?
Well, I thought it was a crime that he had so much to say about St. Louis and didn't live in St. Louis. I think also that I have worked at the Cincinnati Enquirer. I have worked at papers that had a very conservative editorial board. The people that ran it were not jerks. I have my own personal experience with him on a telephone call, which, I would ask him about if I ever saw him, personally. I think the Post-Dispatch and I think the region is in better shape now that he is gone. It's not a place for vendettas. It's a place for opinion. And I just didn't like him.
He told Beavis Schock, the local attorney, after he rejected one of Schock's columns for an opinion piece, he said, "Never send me another column, ever." So, but I will say, when they redid the everyday section of the Post-Dispatch,
That's a long
he
time
printed, no, just last year. Remember when they got rid of the comics and all that? Got rid of Miss Manners.
Okay, I thought you were talking
They
about...
did print, I think to the Post credit, one angry letter after another for weeks and weeks, which is not an easy thing to do.
And
Take criticism.
I think that Todd had some interpersonal relationship problems, and like with you, Alvin, that being rude to people is inexcusable when you're a newspaper executive. But I thought the editorials were pretty good. I mean, they did take a more conservative, balanced tone. And I think that the good news is Kevin McDermott, who writes a Sunday column. And Kevin is a good liberal in the sensible, old tradition of liberalism. I think the paper's editorial page is in very good hands right now.
I like Kevin a lot, and I don't know how did we arrive in a place where that is tolerable for a major daily newspaper to have an editor editing from Connecticut
and
for 6 months of the year.
It's remote work.
But not
He's a man of our times.
not a newspaper.
Well, I remember when we had a local columnist, Elaine Viets, who moved
From
to
Florida, right.
And Elaine continued to be a local columnist
But that's
from Florida.
But that's I mean, I think that's still a stretch. But that's not an editor.
I know what
I
you
mean,
mean.
your name is on the
Well, the
masthead.
paper's edited out of Indiana, right?
I don't know. Well, we have Foster Davis, who was the overall editor, after, or maybe he was just the managing editor under Bill Wu. Foster loved North Carolina so much that we'd have an over-under bet on Friday afternoon whether Foster would be gone by 3
Right.
or 5. And, Friday's our busiest day because you're putting out the Saturday paper and really the Sunday paper.
But I don't think an editor should have to read the paper to find out what he's going to write about in the paper.
Yeah.
I mean, what,
Exactly.
does he have like a AP
Exactly.
Newswire machine in his house? Like, hey, everybody's out doing the news and whatnot, but if you're in the newsroom, you know exactly what, within 5 minutes, you know a bunch of stuff happened.
Where does Ray write that Substack
Well,
column? I'd like to know.
I gotta tell you.
Are you in Florida?
Yeah, maybe. No, I don't think so. But I thought it was addition by subtraction. But I would say that one of the sad things is we're talking. This is the most attention it's gotten. The Post editorial page has gotten in 10 years. I mean, it's just not what it was in terms of relevance. And I don't agree that the editorials have been so great. I think that I've always had this theory that you could draw, and this goes back 40 years, you could draw concentric circles around the Post-Dispatch, and the further it gets away from home, the more liberal it gets. So on international policy, it's the most liberal, a very liberal paper. On national, when you get state issues, it gets more conservative. When you get to local issues, it's flat out right wing, and then
Because of time, I got to cut you off.
You have a fever.
and then it's labor issues.
Big issue out of Jeff City where the legislature, the House and the Senate, both passed a bill that's going to the governor's desk that is going to not allow gender-affirming care for minors in the state of Missouri. No more puberty blockers, no more hormone therapy. I think we now join 13 or so other states in doing that, Ray.
It's just heartless, it's stupid, it's disrespectful to the parents of these kids. And I happen to be a very proud godfather of a goddaughter who used to be a godson. And I resent greatly anyone suggesting that it's anyone's business. It's certainly we should respect the rights of parents and the healthcare needs of a very vulnerable population of, I'd prefer to call them trans Missourians, because they're every bit as much Missourians as the rest of us, but we're always describing them as others. And the fact is, people who are transgendered have every right to healthcare needs, and the government needs to butt out. And frankly, it affects so few people. All this is just Republican Trump-based politics. It's very disgusting.
When Dr. Ken Howler was our special guest several weeks ago on this issue, we had a tremendous response. And, when it comes to watching documentaries from today, looking back on the 80s, so many Republican administrations regret that there was more, feet dragging than acting aggressively when it came to the AIDS crisis. And I think that any time you look back, you want to have been your most compassionate. And this might not affect a lot of people, but with the statistics involving suicide, the rate of suicide for these people, I think that they're going to really regret this decision one day.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, it's kind of like gays. I mean, when I started working here on the newspaper, we still publish lists of men caught in public parks by the Vice Squad, posing as homosexuals, and we just published those lists like nothing. And then gay marriage came along, and people like me thought, well, civil union is a good compromise. And now I think, why didn't I just realize gay marriage was a fine thing all along? it takes a little bit of time for people to get used to these things, and I think that this will be that kind of an issue.
I agree.
Down to the final hours of the legislative session, has the Missouri legislature passed any bill of importance to Missouri? Because when you start taking over the police and trying to get rid of Kim Gardner and transgender and on and on and on, they really don't.
Tax cuts for seniors on Social Security.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
which is
right.
really.
Yeah,
I'm sadly one of them, and what a waste of just blowing another larger hole in the state budget so that we'll have less money to pay troopers, for public education,
Wendy's
for social
highway
services,
expansion,
any
not
of that.
gonna come
We're going to
to
do it.
That's right.
And it's
Our
taking a
bullet
hit.
train, what the
That's
heck did we
right.
call it?
Bullet train.
if they had some
Hyperloop.
Hyperloop.
if they were going to have a reason, the point, and Alvin's point is what you can look at what the Minnesota legislature is doing right now. A whole bunch of stuff, you know, free tuition for college kids, all kinds of stuff they're doing that
Okay.
actually affect people in a positive way.
Ray, I'm sorry to say, our time is up. It's time to go to the old mailbag and see what the viewers had to say about last week's program. I had not cried for Mr. Shannon until Wendy choked up. R.I.P. Mr. St. Louis Shannon. That from Lori Sweet of St. Louis. We also heard from Paul Owens, who wrote, how about Clarence Thomas to replace Kim Gardner? And Simon Barker of Clarksville, Missouri shared this. Please discuss recycling in St. Louis again when you all have more background into the issue. I was appalled at the lack of knowledge about what is happening today. Thank you, Mr. Barker. You can write us care of 9 PBS, 3655 Owl Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Donnybrook at 9pbs.org for emails, and for tweets, use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Listen to us, or no, call the 9 line at 314-512-9094. Then listen to us on your favorite podcast source, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and Google Play. Don't forget to join us for Donny Bash, June the 15th. It's going to be the biggest night of the year. That's how you can get the tickets. Don't go away, because in just a moment, Alvin and Ray will talk to the man who is the voice of Kermit the Frog and Big Bird. How about that? Next on Next Up.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9 PBS.